There are few things as satisfying as a great attacking game from Paul Morphy, and that's what we have today. This is a game he played in 1850 in New Orleans. It is a casual game against an opponent named James McConnell. And in this game, we see classic Morphy themes of lead and development and brilliant attacking play. McConnell has white in the game. Morphy has black. Let us jump right in. E4, E5. It's on the board. Knight to F3, Knight C6, and McConnell plays bishop to C4. Morphy replies with bishop to C5. So this is the Italian game. Now here, McConnell plays B4, which is, of course, the Evans gambit. Now at that time, gambits were quite common in chess, and Morphy played the white side of this gambit quite a bit himself. The idea is to give up a pawn on the wing, the B pawn, and then advance quickly in the center and use it to gain a lead in development. Morphy goes ahead and takes the pawn. C3 is played, and we see the outline of White's idea. To play a quick D4 by gaining a tempo on this bishop after C3. Play a quick D4, then queen to B3, and put a lot of pressure on this F7 pawn, and black really has to defend to survive this attack. Morphy plays bishop to A5. The bishop could go to E7, that's also a move, but bishop to A5 is played. Now here the main move for white is D4, and the idea is if black takes, white can just castle, and white can even give up a third pawn. But then queen to B3, black can get in trouble very quickly. If he tries to defend that pawn with, say, queen to E7, then knight takes pawn. Now the knight is threatening to jump into D5 and hit the queen. So let's say black takes the knight, which is the best move. Queen takes. In this position, black is in huge trouble. At the moment, white is threatening the pawn at G7. If queen to F6, then a move like E5 gives white a huge attack. And if knight to F6, bishop to A3 hits the queen. And again, white has a huge attack. But McConnell does not play the immediate D4. He instead castles, and that gives Morphy just enough breathing room to push back. Morphy plays knight to F6. Now D4 is played, and Morphy castles. And with his king castled on the king side, he's going to be quite a bit safer than black was in the lines we just looked at. White takes on E5. Morphy recaptures on E4. Now bishop to A3. The bishop attacks the rook at F8, but it would be much better if black had not castled yet, and this bishop were preventing black from castling by threatening one of the squares. So Morphy's doing okay here. He plays D6, blocking the threat to his rook. Here the best move for white is probably bishop to D5. Then after, say, knight C3, bishop to C3, white can get a playable position after, say, ED6, taking the exchange, giving back the exchange. And here, essentially, black's up a pawn, but it's very hard to convert a position like this. Queen takes bishop in the endgame. But instead, white plays the more obvious move, really, but not as good move. He takes D6, and Morphy recaptures with the knight, threatening the bishop at C4. And Morphy has clearly survived the opening and is doing well. The bishop moves to save itself. Now bishop to G4, and take a look at this position. White gambited the pawn. He's the one that should have the lead in development, you would think. But Morphy has the lead in development. He has 4 minor pieces developed versus white's 3 minor pieces. White's queen side is not yet fully developed. We see the rook and knight here on B1 and A1. White plays H3, bishop to H5, and queen to D5. White continues to ignore his development. That's going to catch up with him. He's attacking the bishop at H5. Now, Morphy does not want to take the knight. He doesn't want to make that exchange because after queen to F3, he's up a pawn, but white has the bishop pair, and it's probably a fairly equal position. He wants to keep pieces on the board. He plays bishop to G6. That bishop is on a very nice diagonal, leading towards the B1 square. Now here, white makes a move. I'm not sure if this was a great idea. He plays the move knight to E5. Obviously, he's threatening to grab this bishop, and he wants to distract this knight away from its defense of the bishop at A5. The problem is this. Right now, you have a knight here that's defending the king, and this knight at c6 is not involved in a direct attack. So by exchanging off that knight, he aids Morphy's attacking play. So Morphy goes ahead and takes that knight. And here the best move for white is probably to take the knight, and after bishop to b6, he's just worse. I mean, he's down a pawn. That's it. And a little bit worse pawn structure. But that wasn't McConnell's idea. McConnell's idea was to take the bishop at a5, which he does. But look at this position. Notice the queen and the king. The geometry of the chessboard is really quite magnificent. You would think that these two pieces would have nothing to do with each other. There would be no relationship here. But Morphy finds the vulnerability. He plays the move queen to g5 with a very serious threat. He's threatening knight to f3 check. And when the king moves, and I can't be taken because there's a pin here. When the king moves, queen takes queen. He would win the queen. So queen to g5 is quite a serious threat. White sidesteps that for the moment with king to h1. Now there's no check at f3, no discovery. But Morphy plays bishop to e4, threatening mate on g2. Now white could defend that with rook to g1, but then queen to f5 is very strong. He's threatening queen takes h3 mate. Notice the pawn would not be able to take the queen because the bishop pins the g2 pawn. So there's a threat of mate on h3. If f3 is played, then he could just play bishop takes f3. And again, he's threatening queen takes h3 mate. So if pawn takes, then queen to h3 is still mate. So serious threats are developing. So instead of playing rook to g1, McConnell plays the immediate f3. But Morphy, undeterred, goes ahead and takes it anyway, sacrifices the bishop for the pawn. And after pawn takes bishop, he jumps in with queen to g3. There are threats of knight takes f3 with threats of mate. There's also queen takes h3 check on the board that white has to deal with as well. Knight to d2. Only now does he finally finish his minor piece development, defending the f3 pawn, preventing the knight from taking it. Morphy plays knight to f5. Now this knight can cause a lot of trouble, particularly on the e3 square, where if the knight on e3 would threaten mate with queen to g2. For example, black's threat here is to take on h3, king g1, queen g3, and then knight to e3 threatening mate, and there's really nothing white can do. He can play rook to f2, queen f2, rook to g1, but the reason that you take the pawn first in that line is because of this move, queen to h4 mate. The knight covers g2, the queen is attacking. So that doesn't work. So white plays rook a to e1, keeping the knight out of e3 for the moment, and also attacking black's knight on e5 twice. Queen to h3 check, king to g1. Now rook f to e8. The knight is defended once. The problem is at any time black can check and defend later. Rook to f2 comes from white. Queen to g3 check. Now here white cannot block with rook to g2 because the queen would just take the rook at e1. So king to f1 is played in the game, but now knight to d3 with the threat of mate with queen takes f2. White first takes on e8 with check, exchanging the rooks. Then white plays bishop to f7 check, attacking the king and attacking the rook. And if Morphy takes that bishop, he would be losing, because then queen to f5 check, followed by queen takes knight, and white would just be winning. But all Morphy has to do is this, king to h8, and the game is over. There is nothing left to be done. Let's say, for example, rook to g2 here. You can mate with the rook or the queen. The game is completely over, not to mention threats of coming in. This knight, it's over. And so McConnell resigned. A beautiful attacking game, classic Morphy chess. I hope you've enjoyed it. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.